that ought to be introduced in order to combat these as diseases. You also mentioned the fact that churches could do more, and I think that that's very significant because large numbers of our viewers are church people, and perhaps many of them never gave any real thought of how the church might be able to deal with this as a problem. And of course, you also know that the church has some sort of attitudes in reference to these as problems. Let's talk about those, about the church and these as problems this morning, that is AIDS and adolescent pregnancy.
A health educator said about 140 years ago that health education ought to be preached from the pulpit. And that's a very timely statement, and it's very relevant today. Where else can you get parents and children together? I think health ought to be preached every Sunday from the pulpit. AIDS education ought to be taught from the pulpit. And it also should be taught in the classrooms, the Wednesday night kind of thing that
Sunday schools
and Sunday school, that kind of thing. It should be taught then. We should talk about it.
But you don't think that the church is assuming its responsibility? And
no,
of course,
I don't.
When we talk about church, we're talking about churches in general, because we do recognize that perhaps some churches are
doing some good things. I think Payne Chapel here in Nashville is doing a wonderful job. Allen Chapel over in Murfreesboro is doing an excellent job. These churches have afternoon programs for children, and they teach children how to develop self-esteem and how to feel good about themselves. And one of the things that I believe is that if you teach children to feel good about who they are, they won't resort to these kind of behaviors that are so detrimental.
Very good. And so the church and the school can play a very, very important part in terms of education. Now, what about the state or the federal government? Do you see a role for the state or the federal government in this kind of education project, even if it's a matter of providing resources?
I think what they can do best is just send us some money. The federal government can send monies down to the state, and the state could allocate that money to the local level.
Well, now, quite recently, there was a program dealing with this in Murfreesboro. Now, what was the purpose of that program? Why don't you give us some information in reference to how that program came about, adolescent pregnancies and that kind of information?
There's a task force of some local professionals in Murfreesboro, mainly nurses. I was not aware of it until very, very recently. But these people meet, and what they try to do is one of the things that they try to do is to make sure that the community is aware of the increasing amount of pregnancies among adolescents, and try to pull the community together to see what the community can do to conquer the problem. That's mainly.
Do you think the community is aware of the increase? You know, it's very easy for us to talk about how the numbers are increasing and compare statistical data from last year with this year and see the increase and et cetera. But do you think that the average person in the community is aware of this as a problem, or even believes that he or she can be affected by this as a problem?
I think that the average person is unaware that it can actually affect them. There's a lot of apathy out there. It's as if this is a problem that's happening in someone else's backyard and not in theirs.
It's somebody else's problem. It is not their problem.
And they don't realize that these children are the adults of tomorrow, and these are the people who may have to take care of us when we're in our old age. These are the people who may be mugging on the streets one day.
Very good.
They don't see it in terms of that.
Well, I think one of the things that many of us talk about when we talk about adolescent or teen pregnancy is the fact that we generally define it as a female problem, as a problem that sort of, quote, just happens to the female population. But now, what do you see as some of the responsibilities of the male in this as a problem? I mean, what message can you give to our young men this morning that would sort of bring them into focus of recognizing that this too is part of the problem that they have to face or to deal with?
To use a little cliquish, just use a little saying that Jesse Jackson said years ago, any male can make a baby, but it takes a man to raise a child. That kind of concept needs to be spread out. When I spoke to you earlier about teaching little boys to respect little girls, you have to do that, and it has to start back in kindergarten. We have double standards in this country. It's the girl's responsibility. She's the person who allowed herself to get pregnant, and she's a bad girl if she gets pregnant. There's no responsibility on the young man, and we've conditioned our little boys to feel that way. And what we have to do is to go back and realize that we're doing it wrong, go back and re-educate these children.
You mentioned the fact that some churches have developed programs that will deal with this, but you also mentioned that that there's a sociological problem generally associated with this, and that is that many of the people who become pregnant really have very limited self-esteem, and they have lack of any kind of future prospects. And let's talk about that for a while. I mean, how do you create a situation to perhaps encourage our young women to perhaps delay sexual activity in view of some of the
our
other
young
things?
women and our young men.
To perhaps, very good, and perhaps delay sexual activity until a certain time.
Our children need to feel good about themselves. The majority of our children don't feel good about themselves. Let's just look at what's done in the public schools in terms of black children. We don't teach black history in most of our public schools. White is good. Black is
evil or bad.
Evil or bad. And not all children are raised in families like mine and yours, where our children know that black is good and black is beautiful. And a lot of children feel really bad about being black. It lowers their self-esteem, and consequently that many times leads them to participate in behaviors that are detrimental to their health, like the use of drugs, like premature sexual activity.
Crime, I think, is
sure, violence.
Violence, that's all. In view of the activity that you've been involved in, what are some of the programs that you found to be important or instrumental in terms of perhaps providing the kind of information that is necessary to eliminate this as a major problem?
Dr. Foster has a program called I Have a Future. That's a very, very good program, and it helps to elevate the black teens' self-esteem. But there are several. I can't just call the name of one off right now.
There's so many different programs. What we're concerned about, I think, are the ingredients that would be involved in such a program. That I think you mentioned the program at Meharry Medical College, Dean Foster's program, I Have a Future. Well, but now, what about that program? I know that you can't explain his program, but I'm sure that you are familiar enough with that program to sort of give our audience an idea as to what they're trying to accomplish with such a program.
Well, they're trying to build the self-esteem of the children and to delay some of these behaviors that we know are detrimental to the health. But one of the things that Dr. Foster does is to provide incentives, rites of passage kinds of incentives. I think there's a monetary reward given to students who delay these kinds of behaviors.
I think from a medical point of view, it's probably less expensive than some of the costs that are generally associated with premature infants and underweight infants and whatnot. And so you believe that if somehow we could provide some kind of basis, some kind of monetary compensation to young people, that perhaps they might be willing to delay becoming involved, that might be enough incentive to...
Well, see, I don't think money necessarily has to be that incentive. In our program, we're offering students books that deal with some of the, well, Malcolm X, Angela Davis, things like that.
Now, what is the name of your program now?
It's the Allenite Human Development Center.
The Allenite Human Development
Center, and it's in Murfreesboro, and it was operated by Allen Chapel AME Church.
So it's a religious-based program that the funding comes primarily from the church?
From the church, from the community. We've tried several times to get our proposal funded, but we've been right at the door, but not quite.
Well,
some of the larger programs that have that focused on a lot of drug abuse have really gotten the money.
Well, now, what could you say this morning in terms